Good afternoon. It gives me immense pleasure to be part of this online series of special lectures on research methodology, which is being organized by Institute of Distance and Open Learning, University of Mumbai. I'm thankful to Professor Rathore, Dr. Mandar, and Ms. Pankti Surve for providing me this opportunity. The topic for today's discussion is ethics in social research. Before we come to ethics, let us discuss and understand what do we mean by research. I'm sure we have a large gathering of students who are coming to IDOL and who are taking the help of the study material and these lectures to understand what is research, because somewhere they are going to use it in their life later with their applicability and practical inputs. Now, when we talk about research, the term itself says research, where we are talking about searching again and again. Sometimes it's a pioneer research, it's a pilot study which is being done for the first time. There are times where pilot studies are being done, or there are already established studies which are being available. But later, maybe after a decade or after a particular period is being passed out, we wish to see the effect of that particular research again on our society. And that is how research is being done on that same community, same topic, or same data to have a comparative analysis on it. Now, when we're talking about research, it can be clearly divided into two categories, where we are talking about quantitative data, quantitative research, and qualitative research. While talking about quantitative research, it's a research where we are going to collect data in form of numbers and we are going to put it for statistical analysis. Whereas when we are talking about qualitative research, we are having data in the form of qualitative narratives, case studies, interviews, and of course, with today, when we have a lot of applications, the qualitative data also can be transferred into quantitative data. But the efficiency with it is being done, that's required to be questioned, or that requires a lot of consideration there. Otherwise, depending on the requirement of the study, we can decide whether we want to have qualitative data or we want to have quantitative data. Recently, we also have mixed method, which is being applicable in majority of the cases. There are also type when we see that people are taking use of quantitative data for collecting one set of data and applying the qualitative method for collecting another set of data. So it is purely on the basis of requirement of the study or the social scientist, whether they are going to take quantitative data or qualitative data for the purpose of their study. Now, why are we concerned about ethics in social science is something that's a topic of our discussion today. So let's begin with what do we mean by ethics in research. Now, when we talk about term called ethic, it's very important for us to understand what do we mean by ethic. Ethic is when we talk about morality, when we talk about character, when we talk about what is good and what is bad. Let us be very clear, the ethical issues are something which is being defined by governing bodies. What may be ethical in one setting may or may not be ethical in another setting. And that is why ethical issues are extremely important to deal with, to understand the sensitivity with the research, that what can be applicable in which situation. So ethics are basically self-regulatory guidelines for making decisions and defining professionals. So what is my ethical guideline when I'm doing the research will be applicable to me. At the same time, the community or the society or an institution that we are studying, they will also have their ethical guidelines, what can be collected, what cannot be collected, what can be presented, what kind of data will have accessibility to whom. So it's not just the ethic which is to be followed on the part of the researcher who is collecting the data, but that researcher is also supposed to take into consideration the requirement of ethical guidelines of the institution that he is collecting data from. So ethics are norms for conduct that distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Having said this, we can see that if we are conducting research into a particular organization, are we allowed to interview the workers to the way we want to interview them? Do we have accessibility to the managerial level position people? And whether they are allowed to disclose everything of the corporate or everything of the organization that they belong to. So we have to keep this thing into mind, that we are not disrespecting the ethical guideline of the person. We are sensitive towards the person to whom we are interviewing or from whom we are collecting the data at the same time. So ethical consideration in research are a set of principles that guide our research design and practices. Scientists and research must always adhere to certain code of conduct when collecting data from people. We just can't go and take people as a site, observe them, click their photographs, prepare videos on them. That is something which is against ethic. And at this point of time where we have accessibility to mobile phone, everybody becomes a researcher, everybody becomes an observer. So what kind of ethics do we follow when we are capturing anybody's photographs or anybody's video when we are collecting the data? We will be looking at all these issues in detail as we move further. Now, why this ethical issues or ethic is important in research? First of all, when we are talking about social sciences, we are mainly dealing with human beings, except for psychology, where we have experiments which are being conducted on animal also. There also we need to be considerate about what kind of research can be conducted on whom and at what level. But generally, when we are talking about social sciences and we are talking about human beings who are our subject, the society, the community that we are studying, so it's extremely important for us to be sensitive towards their requirement, towards their living, towards their area, towards their surrounding, towards their well-being, and we have to ensure that we are not affecting them in any of the ways. At the same time, when we have ethical consideration being taken in care when we are conducting research, we ensure that research is credible also. In order to show our credibility of the research, it is extremely important that ethical issues should be taken into consideration. And also at the same time that we are not violating the human rights and dignity of the participant. There are times where we come across as new reporter who will go to an area which has suffered from disaster for XYZ reason, taking the photos or videos of the people, at times the people who are dying, the people who are in a very difficult state. Now, are we following some ethical guidelines which are being decided by us? Are we violating the human rights rules and regulation? All these things require consideration here. Now, when we talk about ethical codes are written rules and regulations to protect the research subject and their setting, neither of which should be harmed by the research process. In any of the process, from beginning of the process, from where we are deciding the topic till the end of the process, that is like publication of the data, in none of the processes the participant should be harmed in any of the manner. Now, what are ethical codes? There are professional associations across the world. Very well known as American Psychological Association, which will give you the ethical code of conduct, how a research is to be conducted. But at the same time, you will have IRB, Institutional Review Board, of every organization, which will have the written code of conduct, what kind of research can be conducted, what kind of data can be collected, and what kind of interviews can be given to any researcher who has come to collect the data. Now, why is ethic important? Of course, I'm just going to run through the slide where we are just going to just look at the importance of it, because each of it will be discussed when we are going to take up each issue separately in detail. Now, what moral principles guide our research? Are we going to go to a particular area and look at our researcher as a subject only for collecting the data? Are we sensitive towards their stigmatization? Are we sensitive towards their need? Are we sensitive towards if you are interviewing or if you are conducting field work or case study with particular houses, what kind of perception the people of the area is going to have about them has to be taken into consideration. Now, we also need to take into consideration how the selection of a research problem is affected by ethical consideration and how ethical issues affect in conduction of our research, the design of our study, the sampling procedure, and so on. What sample are we going to take? And if our sampling is probability sampling, in later lectures, I'm sure you all are going to deal with what are different type of probability and non-probability sampling. That's something we cannot discuss here due to paucity of time. But when we are talking about probability sampling where the population is being known, you have the complete list of population. And in that case, if we are selecting certain respondent as random, we need to see whether those people are willing to be part of the respondent group, whether they want to be part of the research or the project or not. Otherwise, whether we can apply non-probability sampling there or not. And if we are applying non-probability sampling, are we taking the ethical issues into consideration at that level also? Now, what responsibility do we have towards research subject? If there is an organization or there are people of the area who have given you interviews or those who have given you their experiences against a political party or the gun in that particular area or against the organization, are we as a researcher going to take the responsibility that the data which is being collected is going to remain extremely confidential, that nobody will have any harm to face or suffer later? Then what ethical issues and dilemma might come into play in deciding what research finding we publish? Are we going to publish it as a primary source of data? Are we going to refer or give the references, what kind of references we have done when we have taken secondary source of data? What kind of credibility is being given to the studies which are being used? At the same time, plagiarism check, which is a very important code with ethical guidelines. We'll be discussing that in later part of it. And will our research directly benefit those who participate in the study? There are times when we see that we are meeting people, we are collecting data, but once the study is being over, the researcher has got his or her findings. But what happens to the people, the community, or the locality in which the study is being conducted? So when we are talking about types of ethical issues, there are innumerable issues which get affected when we are collecting data in research. So there are concerns related to language. When we are going and studying people, are they comfortable with our language? Or are we trying to show some status by using a particular language? So it is extremely important for the researcher to go and speak to the people in the language of comfort in which people are comfortable to give their replies. And at the same time, that knowing of a language will provide comfort zone to people. They will become more open and they will be more happy to participate in the research, rather if we have a translator to do the translation, because language can become a barrier. Then we have equity of access to the study. Are we going to give access of our finding to whom? To the respondent, to the government agencies, to the NGOs, to the funding agency? That's another issue. Then what kind of consent and agreement? We are going to deal with informed consent in detail in later part of our slides. Then what are different kind of risk and how we can minimize this risk to the participant who are becoming part of our study? What is the relationship between the participant and the researcher? Are we able to break through the ice? Are we able to develop that rapport with the researcher where they are open to speak about everything? Whether we are going to have a overt role or we are going to have covert role, and whether using that overt or covert role in that particular setting is ethical or unethical. How are we going to deal with the issue of data when it is being collected How are we going to keep our respondent as anonymous? How we are going to keep our data as confidential? And of course, minimizing the various harm that can be done to the participant, whether it is psychological, social, legal, or emotional, we need to take that also into consideration. Now, first of all, the first and the foremost thing is participation. When we are deciding a target group who is going to be part of our research, are we giving them the right that they have a complete right to participate at their own will? And if they have participated, whether they have the right to withdraw in between. That's something which is very important. As a researcher, we might take people who can be part of our study, but there can be people who will feel uncomfortable once the study is being started, or in between they would like to withdraw. Are we going to give that kind of a freedom to the participant when we are conducting research? Now, first of all, assuring that the questioning will not distress the subject. It's extremely important that we have a pilot testing of our questionnaire that we are going to use for our survey, we are going to use it for our interview, or we are going to use it for our focus group discussion. A pilot study should be done on a very small group of participants to ensure that there are no psychological or sensitivity issues which arise out of it. We are not going to ask such questions which is going to hurt the sentiments of anybody. And if it is hurting the sentiment, that at the pilot level that can be decided, that question can be removed or that can be reframed in some other manner where people are more comfortable to speak about it. Then informing the subject about their expected role in the study. Are we just going to be the observer, recording or writing the minute details of the research which have taken place, or we are going to explain the whole process of project to the participants where they are aware about each and every aspect of project, how the research is going to be conducted. Now here one thing is very important: who are going to be our subject, who are our respondent. Now in case if we have the respondent who belong to a control group, right, what kind of data can be generated and do they have the right to withdraw out of it? Now in this situation, when we are going and requesting people, let's take example. Now when we have a educational institute where the students are to be part of the subject, part of the research as a subject, and the students are being identified by the teacher or by the principal or any other authority of the college or the school or any of the educational organization for that matter. Now, will the student feel comfortable or will they have the right to withdraw from the research in between if they feel so? Because they're in the situation of control group, there is a moral obligation that our teacher has asked us to be part of this research, our principal or the college authorities has asked us to be part of this research, so it becomes moral obligation for them to continue. So do we give that kind of a freedom or that kind of an explanation to the participant that they can withdraw at any point of research out of their own free will? The potential risk of participating. Now, mostly in social sciences, there are less potential risks as far as physical harm is concerned. But of course, when people are doing sting operation, otherwise, you will also see that when there are medical researches which are being conducted, or we have psychological research which are being conducted, we also come across that there are participants who may face psychological or health risks. The question is, are we going to inform our participant about the health risk or issues which may arise in the process of research? Generally, the informed consent is being taken, but people are not made aware what kind of problems can occur later. So, and if that kind of a situation arises, what kind of compensation will be given to the people? What kind of treatment will be given to the people? We will take that into consideration. Then freedom to withdraw from the study at any time without any consequences. So do we have the right to withdraw without any control coming on us, without any stigma coming on us, or anybody is going to question us that why did you withdraw, or you don't have the right to withdraw once you have become part of the research or study. Now, when we talk about informed consent, that's very important aspect of research. Informed consent can be in two parts. It can be oral consent or it can be written consent. In case of pilot study or in case of simple study where we want to know the behavior of somebody towards a particular issue or a subject, an oral consent is sufficient. But when we are having studies which is being conducted on a community, on a larger group of people, which is sensitive in nature, then it is always prescribed and suggested that we should have a written code of conduct as far as our informed consent are concerned. Now, one thing which requires attention here is who is giving the consent, who is taking the consent. With ethical issues, whether both the parties are having the same bargaining power when we are talking about informed consent. Since when we are talking about medical, let's say that people who are having the knowledge of medical, the people who are in power, they have a better bargaining capacity than the people who offer them to be available for research. So in this study, when psychological studies are concerned or medical studies are concerned, or say for my PhD topic where I was studying the surrogates, once you give the consent that you want to be part of this particular study, research, or you are ready to become a surrogate, a person is making his body available to the medical examiner for every kind of treatment that can be done, about which people are not aware about, or the risk and the possibilities of damage, the harm which can be done, whether social, psychological, physical, that is not being explained. And once the consent is being signed, it is being taken as something which is already gone to the file, and that gives them the right to do any kind of medical procedure on any kind of subject which is available to them. So whether this informed consent has a equal bargaining power. Now, why informed consent is to be taken? It is to be taken to ensure that subject participation is fully voluntary and informed. But I told you that it can be voluntary, but it may not be fully informed, because a person may not know the medical procedures which may fall in the process of conducting research. Then what are its risk and benefit? Are we informing the person that it can be a health risk, or it can be a life risk, or the drugs or the medicines which are going to be given to the person can have long-term medical consequences on their health or psychological well-being? Then how the results will be used, and the fact that participation is voluntary. And the last, and can be stopped any time that the identity is to be protected. Now, as I told you, that's a very important issue, that identity is to be protected. Now, we will deal it with in detail when we are going to deal with the issue of identity and confidentiality. Now, the principle of objectivity in ethical issues. What is objectivity and what is subjectivity? As a student of social science, we all need to be aware about positivism, which is being given by Auguste Comte, where he talk about using of scientific method when we are using any of the method for social sciences for collecting our data or finding a solution. Any experimentation which is to be done has to be on the scientific line of positivism. Whereas you have Max Weber who talk about interpretatism, where we all know that we as human beings always have the tendency to interpret anything from our previous experiences, prejudices, or contact with the people, and on the basis of that we try to interpret the data. Now what is needed here is we need to study the nature of the data, empirical data which is being collected through study, rather than whatever preconceived notions and ideas we have in our mind. The findings have to be natural. Our personal belief, values, judgment, and preconceived notions are to be kept apart when we are conducting any study. And of course, disclosing to sensibilities. Whenever we are talking about having objectivity as a researcher, we always need to talk about our background, our identity, our nature of study, so that anybody wants to have objective viewpoint is able to correlate with what we have collected and what we have presented. Another important issue is of deception and disclosure in research. Now, deception related to explaining the intention of the research. It's very important. Now, suppose I want to conduct a research and I go to a hospital and say that I want to collect data on how many doctors are doing their work sincerely, or how many patients are genuine, or any kind of research, then if I go and I explain the nature of my study, there is a possibility that because of their power of knowledge, we may not have access to them. So, can I have access to them with the original identity, or the person is going to take the identity of a patient or any of the medical or lab technician and be a part of the study? To what extent we can have strategic deception? Now, remember that even when we have strategic deception, we have to see that we are not um, playing with the integrity or the sanctity of the participants. Now, whether we are participating in covert manner, if you identify, if you hide your identity, whether you will be in position to collect your empirical data, or if you are going to disclose your identity, whether you are going to collect the empirical data. Of course, these are very tricky issues, but depending on the requirement of the study, one has to deal with it in a very sensitive manner. Now, deception related to disclosure of identity. It's not just the identity of the researcher that I am going to disclose what I am doing the study. It's also about the identity of the respondent, whether we are going to keep their identity as safe or confidential, and how, to what level we can use strategic deception to collect the data. Whether we will have transparency in our data, and after the data is being collected, whether who will have accessibility to data. Apart from confidentiality, what data is being collected and what analysis are available, whom are we going to give access to have the data. Now, protection of integrity, privacy and confidentiality. Now, identity of the subject must remain unidentifiable, because if at any point of time the subjects are being identified by anybody, there can be any kind of harm that can be done to a person. The person might give us the information, but the information which is of use to us can create ethical issues or problem with other group of people. As I told you, when we talk about ethics, it's a question of what is good and what is bad. So what data I've collected might be good for me by doing a sting operation because I would like to help people, but at the same time it will go against the ethical code of the organization from whom the data is being collected. So the person who has been part of the research can have physical harm, or will have to face physical, or will have risk of any other kind of harm. That is why keeping their identity safe is something which is very important. In order to do that, the data must be coded anonymously. Like for example, if I am collecting data from say 5 organizations, I can name the organization as organization 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, and the decoding will be available only with the researcher or the organization who's conducting the research. So nobody will even get to know that whether organization 1 is in South Bombay, or it is in townside, North Bombay, or it is in suburb or extended suburb. The confidentiality of data will be available only with the researchers who are conducting it, and the respondent who are giving the response can be coded as respondent number 1 or A or B or something, that whatever way we want to. So coding of data is something that can be applicable as one of the measures for keeping the identity safe of the respondent. Then there is the issue of material concerning the research are to be stored in safe place and should not be accessible. Now, once the data has been collected, how are we going to keep that data safe, or how long we are going to keep that data available with us after the study is being done? How long we are going to have the diaries or the rough records with us, maybe for a year or two, or to whom it will be accessible and where it will be saved, and how it should not be accessible to any other, so that the integrity of the person is not being not being attacked. Then permission of using the photos and data. There are times where we click the photographs of the respondents or the area or the organization. It's extremely important for us to take the informed consent, whether those photographs can be used and where it can be used. Let me give you an example of one of my studies that I conducted with surrogates in one particular surrogacy home. The surrogates were willing to give the photographs. Of course, they charge us. I will talk about that issue also. But they said we are okay if the photographs are appearing, or the images are appearing anywhere in any magazines or newspaper of the world, since this study was being done for Swedish magazine. But they were very clear that this particular images should not be available to any of the any of the magazines or any of the newspapers in India. So for that matter, if we are using the photographs, that can be blurred, or the identities should be, or such photographs should be used where their face are not clearly visible when we are using here in India. But if we are using it anywhere else, as they have given us the consent that they are okay if it is coming. Now, the question that I want to raise here, or I want to explain, is if that particular magazine is available online, have we taken the consent that that magazine will be available online? That means anybody across any part of the world will have access to those particular photographs. So are we taking the integrity, privacy, and their confidentiality into consideration by posting those photographs at anywhere or any of the sites? Now, there is another issue of remuneration to the respondent. There are people who say that paying to the respondent for collecting the data is unethical. And as a researcher, at the beginning, even I was not in favor of paying for collecting the data, because one would think that data will be manipulated, or people will be very pro to you because you have paid them. But let me tell you, if you are having a target group who is contractual labor, who works for the day and gets around 400 or 500 rupees a day, and we are going to do a research on them for say 2 hours or for the whole day. Now, they are daily wage earners. Who is going to compensate for their requirement for their daily survival? It's a question of survival for them. So then, when I was interviewing the surrogates and when they asked for 1,000 rupees or 1,500 rupees, I was actually convinced, and I agreed with the idea that yes, for a particular day that they are working, they would otherwise earn 1,000 rupees. So it's moral obligation on the part of the researcher to compensate. I'm not saying that remuneration should be to lure them to collect the data, but it should be compensating for what they are available to the researcher for collection of data. Then, as I said, when we talk about potential for harm, right, researcher has to be considerate enough what kind of possible harm can be done in the way of collecting data. That can be psychological harm. We can ask certain questions which may lead to anxiety, stress. There can be a topic which can be related to communal conflict, or the person who has seen or faced a kind of a disaster or a issue in their own personal life, can be on riots. It will be very sensitive to talk to them on those issues. So are we going to give some kind of psychological harm to them by asking such questions? There are social harm, as I know when I was collecting data for my research with surrogates, when you are going to a particular houses for collecting data, the neighbors would feel very jealous, or neighbors were very concerned about that why are we going to them? Those are not the people with their good moral character. Or other people would think that we were the government officials who were coming for some kind of a survey for providing them pakka houses or collecting the data for the slum survey, and that is why we are going only to a specific houses, and that is why those people were stigmatized. So it's extremely important to take that into consideration. What kind of identity we are going to create at that point of time? I mean, what kind of dress a researcher is going to wear when he or she is going to go to the field to collect the data? A simple thing like, are we going to have water from their vessel which is available for drinking, rather than carrying a Bisleri bottle or a Tupperware bottle? Because those kind of status symbol can also affect the issues related to data collection. Are we comfortable to sitting on the floor where they are sitting, or you try to show that no, I'm not comfortable here? So making somebody uncomfortable is also a very important ethical issue there. Then when we are talking about physical harm, that physical harm can be when we are doing sting operation for collecting data, and as I told you, in case of medical treatment or medical research that we are doing on a physical experiment which is being done on the patient, that point of time we are concerned about the physical harm which can be done to the respondent. And of course, there can be legal harm related to the sensitive data which can be used anywhere for any purpose without taking the permission of the person. The most important issue which is there with ethical consideration today is plagiarism, which may not affect most of the students because right now they are into their stage of life where they are into doing research. But once the research is being conducted with a lot of emphasis on publications today, for people to establish themselves into academic and educational institution, publication is something which is becoming extremely important. Now, what is plagiarism? Plagiarism means submitting others' work as own. And right now, when we are talking about, we have load of information which is available to us with networks being available. You have access to so many sites where the articles, research, and data is being available. You have n number of people who are using the data without citing, without giving reference, without acknowledging the work of somebody else and using it as their own data. That is something which is called plagiarism. There are times where people are having self plagiarism also. I can publish one of my papers, one of my book, one of my article in one journal and can publish the same in another one also without giving reference or citing my own article. That can also be a case of self plagiarism. Then there are a lot of misconduct which are going on as far as research publications are concerned, and research conduction also which are being taken place at this point of time. So research misconduct means making up for falsifying data. Now you will see that people will collect the data for 100 people and will try to show that they have collected it for 1,000 people. So playing with the data, giving a falsified data, manipulating the data for their analysis, for making it convenient for them to analyze, or putting it for some quantitative applications, for getting the results quickly with some kind of packages which are available. There are times where this kind of manipulation is also being done. There are misrepresenting results in research report, and it's considered as a kind of academic fraud, right? So that is something, and let me tell you, at this point of time you will see that this is something which is very much prevalent into academic fraternity. You have a lot of software where you can check whether your data, whether your research paper or article or your chapter which you are writing is plagiarized or not. But at the same time, it's very heartening to see that you also have software which are available to tell you that the same paper or same data can be completely changed and being brought onto your screen by using some other kind of application. So while concluding, I would like to uh, talk about three important points. That's the issue of ethical defensibility of using an experimental design with control group. How much of right a control group has when they are part of a particular study? So when we are doing research on handicap, when we are doing research on prisoners, do they have the right to defend themselves, or they have the right to voluntarily participate or voluntarily withdraw from a research process? Then publication without sufficient quality assurance and without replication. That is something which is the need of the hour. We come across that people are publishing their articles in peer-reviewed journal, in UGC careless journals. But when we talk about credentials, we will see that people are not able to stand anywhere. So that's something which is the need of the hour, that social scientists have to ensure that their article, their research is of such level of international credentials where they are being recognized for the kind of research that they have done. And one issue which is very important at this point of time is how media reports are available, how fabrication of the news is being done in media in the absence of research. It's very easy for the reporter, it is very easy for the news channels. In order to improve the TRP reporting, they will come up with fake news, they will come up with some fabricated news, they will just come up with some kind of sensational news which might attract the attention of the public for the time being, and at the same time it might lead to hatredness amongst the larger masses at country level, and it would take a very long period of time for the researcher to actually investigate that how it was being fabricated and how the fake news was able to spread the hatredness and hate among the people. uh, that is why the need of the hour is you should have the right research conducted on the spur of the minute, so that this kind of fake media reports can be curbed and stopped, so that the peace in the society, community, or in the country can be saved. I just want to share this slide where you have one patent's checklist of questions for conducting an ethical research project. These are the guidelines. These are the checklists. Of course, as I told you, that every institutional review board will have their own guidelines, but these are like a guide which can help you to decide on how to go about your ethical issues in research. Nevertheless, this topic is something which will never end, because what is ethical for one in one setting may be unethical for another person in another setting. So it's extremely important for us to be sensitive to the need of the respondent, need of the subject, and need of the study to ensure that we are giving our best when we are doing any kind of the research. Thank you.